Hello, and welcome back to the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Marshall Kirkpatrick, your host here at the Sprinklr Coffee Club. We like to talk about a wide variety of things on this show. We talk about social media, digital transformation, customer care, the implications of technology on society, and every chance we get, we talk about social change. And today we've got an awesome opportunity to talk about a bunch of those different themes all intersecting
Great.
in the form of a conversation with the very engaged and exciting and inspiring Abadesi Osunsade, the
Yay.
founder of Hustle Crew. Abadesi, hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Marshall. Very excited to be here, Sprinklr Coffee Club.
Cheers. Abadesi, can you begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and the context that you come into this conversation from?
Absolutely. So I started working in tech about 10 years ago, always in very growth and product-oriented roles. I spent 3 years at Groupon, a year at Amazon, a year at Hotel Tonight. Most recently, I worked as head of Maker Outreach on Product Hunt's community team. And yeah, I mean, in 2016, I decided to quit my job with no next move planned because I really didn't enjoy the experience I had at that startup. I felt excluded in a big way for the first time in my career. And going to my tech friends and my tech mentors, I realized it was like, seemed to be an isolated incident. It felt like no one else could really relate to my experience. And then I started realizing the people I was talking about this experience to were mostly guys and mostly white guys. And I started to wonder if this is an experience I felt because I was the only Black person in the team. And I set up a meetup for people who identified as underrepresented in tech. And the first meetup was other women of color, other women. And as we started talking about our next career move, we realized that the reason we'd left the last place we were at was because we didn't feel equally supported in the way our male peers were or in the way our white peers were. And this is really what got me starting to look into why we have double standards in the workplace and why the playing field just doesn't seem to be level. It's like suddenly I had this awakening that our identity will determine our experience at work, even to the point where it could determine how successful we might be or how much we get paid or what opportunities we are given. And this is really ultimately what Hustle Crew is about, teaching people to understand bias, privilege, and structural oppression, but not only understand them, learn to use them as tools and frameworks to make better decisions and be more empathetic, whether that's connecting with a customer or creating content for your community. We have to be able to as much as we can, like relate to the other people's lived experiences, even though our exposure to them is limited, in order to create an authentic connection with them. So that's at the heart of everything we do at Hustle Crew.
That's wonderful. And you've recently made a big step with Hustle Crew, a new announcement, an offering opening up. Can you tell us
Yes.
about that?
Thank you so much for setting that up for me. Last week, we launched Hustle Crew membership. I'm so proud of this. We've decided that, if we really want change to happen, and by change, I mean creating teams with more balance of identities and more sense of belonging, especially from underrepresented identities, we have to open up our toolkit. It's not enough for us as a diversity and tech company to go into every tech company and teach them about bias and privilege and also structural oppression. It's going to be so much more powerful and so much more accelerated a pace of change if each of us as individuals start working out our inclusion muscle, our equality muscle, and start applying these things to every decision we make. So Hustle Crew membership starts at $15 a month, and you get weekly videos and case studies from me diving deep into different types of bias and discrimination we see in the workplace so that you can start labeling it when you see it happen at work and start having conversations about it with your team, as well as virtual workshops every month. So we'll do things like how to discuss race at work, how to tackle unconscious bias, all sorts of things. And yeah, I'm really excited. We're already like over 100 members and counting. So it seems like there's a lot of strong demand for this, and so many individuals just want to get skilled up in this space and do better.
Oh, that's fantastic. It makes me think of the philosopher Herbert Marcuse, who says that insights that represent a rupture of the dominant culture can come from a small place, and then as that space enlarges, thus the world changes.
I love that. I need to copy that quote.
I will
Send it
send
to
it to
me.
you. Yeah, I sure will. Well, it's really exciting to be here talking to you as that process unfolds.
Thank
Uh,
you.
can you talk to us a little bit about uh, your thoughts on, or some advice on, some perspective on the big picture, in particular with regard to talking about race at work?
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like as professionals, especially within the tech space, a lot of us have operated in some of the most intellectually rigorous environments. You're working with the brightest and smartest people. But one of the frustrating things about our Western life, I'm in the UK, but I'm from the US, and we go through all of our education, grade school, college, and not once do we have a group conversation about identity and privilege. And at the same time, we know that our identity and our privileges is determining our opportunities at work and how we're perceived at work. So one of the reasons why it's so hard to talk about race at work is because it's, for many of us, still a bit of a taboo subject, something that we kind of only talk about in the most safest of circles where we know we won't be judged. I had this conversation with my husband just last week where I said to him, when did you realize you were white? And he didn't have an answer to this question. Like, he couldn't think of it. Yet, as a Black kid growing up in suburbs of Maryland when I was very young, I knew when I was Black because it was a moment in school where someone pointed out to me that my parents were different to theirs. And I feel every Black, brown person of color, any underrepresented or marginalized person that falls outside of the dominant group remembers that early memory of when they became other, of when it was pointed out to them that they were not the norm and they were not in the status quo. And so I think it's so important for us to recognize why this is so emotionally triggering and so difficult. If you are in the other category, as I have been a lot of my life as a Black woman navigating tech, navigating the corporate world, I've been very aware of how different I am because of my identity throughout my whole career. Whereas the majority of folks, white professionals, have never had to engage with their white identity, let alone the privilege that gives them if you're viewing it from a lens of structure and institutions and society and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's the main reason why it's so difficult. But at the same time, I kind of like to juxtapose that with the reality that I was a child when someone pointed out that I was different. And I very quickly got used to that. And I was like, that is how it is. I didn't choose my identity. I didn't choose the history of events that preceded me from slavery to empire. Of course, none of us did. And then I also acknowledge that everyone suffers to some extent, and that's the human experience, right? But it's like how we suffer in context of institution that makes us truly different. If I had been able to go on this journey and not be emotionally triggered when people mention my identity or what privileges the fact that I've been to college have given me, or the fact that I've worked at great tech companies has given me, it means that everyone can go on that journey, and it means that everyone can move from a place where, oh my God, we're talking about race, this is so awkward, I'm going to say the wrong thing, I'm going to offend someone, I didn't even know where to start, to a place of, I am so committed to driving greater equality and pro-Blackness that I'm willing to make mistakes because I know that's how I will learn. And when I do make a mistake, I'm gonna say sorry, and I'm gonna try harder, and I'm gonna educate myself, and I'm gonna keep moving forward. I think we're not there yet, but we need to get there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a related concept that I have heard you bring up on one of your podcasts, and that is the idea of decolonizing education.
Yes,
What does that
decolonize the
mean?
curriculum, hashtag. So I'll give you like a bit of context of the story of why I actually started talking about that. So as I mentioned, I live here in London, and I was speaking to my mother-in-law about Black Lives Matter, the movement, the protests, the marches. And her initial response as a woman living here in the UK, a white woman living here in the UK, was to say, oh, I blame Trump. And I said to her, well, actually, Black Lives Matter as a movement is kind of happening everywhere, because everywhere there is systemic oppression, everywhere there is racism. And also, if we look at other people who rallied behind this as allies, it's other people who are also underrepresented and marginalized. And it's like, fighting for Black equality is fighting for everyone's equality. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And that made me remember things which have been well documented in books like Natives by Akala and British by Afua Hirsch, the fact that here in the UK, as well as other countries outside of America, other white countries in Europe, have this almost collective amnesia about the role they played in the slave trade, in colonialization, in empire, in effectively a way of life and philosophy that's whole foundation is the white way is the best way, hence why white men felt compelled to travel to native lands, foreign lands, and, change the culture. So what I'm trying to say when I say let's decolonize the curriculum, let's decolonize education, is let's look at it through a much more critical lens and actually try and think about, wait a minute, who wrote this version of history and whose story is left out? Like, let's apply our critical thinking to this and actually consider, do we genuinely feel this is a purely objective reflection of what happened? Of course not. And, this isn't just about how we revolutionize school or even, higher education. I think this also comes down to us as individuals. 2019, I wrote this blog post. I only read books by Black and brown women, women of color, Asian women as well. And I did that because I realized I was in my 30s and 90% of all books I'd ever read, and I love to read, I'm a bookworm, were written by men or written by white people. Even books about Black people had been written by white people. And I was like, we know that our lived experiences shape everything from the way we think to the way we feel to the way we make decisions. Surely, if I really want to immerse myself in the narratives of Black culture, I should be doing that from like the primary source, right? Like the Black person that wrote this book. So I think it's imperative also for us as individuals to actually be super mindful of who we let educate us now. Like, we all read email newsletters, we listen to podcasts like this, we watch our favorite shows on our streaming services. Who created that content? Are we falling into an echo chamber or a homogenous group of people that reflect ourselves? Or are we inviting ourselves to absorb the lived experiences of other people? I would love to quote the academic Bell Hooks here, because she says, pop culture is where the pedagogy is. That's where our education is. That's where we learn. And she says we have to resist representations, because if we don't resist representations in pop culture and in mainstream media, we fall into the trap of perpetuating them, believing them, and acting on them. And that's what's got us to where we are today. So really, all of us have to decolonize our curriculum. We have to take away the prioritization of the white male straight perspective and think about what other voices are equally critical and valuable in society, but currently underplayed and are not in heavy rotation for us.
Wonderful. That sounds fantastic. How has that changed over time, and in technology in particular, over Bell Hooks' incredible career, for example? Does that tell us about the past, present, and your aspirations for the future in terms of this representation and talking about race at work?
Absolutely. I think representation is definitely getting better. I think the fact that people are even having conversations about it. And I know, for example, in an organization like Netflix, there are people actually dedicated to ensuring there is healthy balance and representation from, Black and brown cultures and other underrepresented cultures. So I think there's been a lot of movement there, but I think there's still a long way to go. And I think in the context of like discussing race at work and engaging with our identity and privilege at work, over the 4 years that I've been running Hustle Crew, I guess what I could say is, in the past, there was a lot of defensiveness and discomfort from the most privileged people in the room. So I'm thinking white men and white women, straight white men and straight white women, cisgender, straight white men and straight women, would very much be defensive of any theories of socialization, institutionalized oppression, always referring back to their own personal traumas or struggles and thinking, but wait, I've struggled too, not really getting that we're talking about institutional discrimination here. So that would always be the challenge of the past. In the present, it feels as though the curtain has fallen and we can understand that there is a disproportionately negative experience for Black communities when it comes to facing institutions like the police or the legal system. So it feels like in the present, white professionals feel more comfortable acknowledging that their whiteness brings them certain privileges, and they can understand the institutional level of discrimination, which is great. So that's awesome. especially over the last few weeks. I think the future is having white professionals proactively spark conversations about white identity and white privilege with other white professionals, whether that's at networking events, whether that's in their own accountability groups, or whatever it is, so that we don't need another event like the horrific events of these previous weeks, the murders of people like George Floyd, for us to realize that building a muscle of equality is key here. We can't only rely on one-off acts, but rather habits. I mean, quoting another philosopher, Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." We are what we repeatedly do. So pro-Blackness must be a habit, not an act.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you for that inspiring vision of the future. What is the best place to connect with you online, Abadesi? You are active in so many different places. Where's the first place people should plug into your work?
I mean, please check out our website, hustlecrew.co. I mean, we just recently updated it. My team's amazing. So you can see, great snapshot right on the homepage of all the services we do and all the different ways that we can help. You can also find me on social media. As Marshall said, I live on the internet, just like all other techies. It's my virtual living room. So you'll find me on Twitter at Abadesi, or Instagram at Abadesi there. I'm also on LinkedIn. LinkedIn gets such a bad rap amongst the cool kids, but I mean, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. I mean, I feel like in my personal circles, people are always like, but really LinkedIn? And I'm like, LinkedIn's great. So yeah, you'll find me there.
That's really interesting. Before I let you go, speaking of the breadth of different services and tools that Hustle Crew offers, is there one that's your favorite right now?
Yes. Absolutely. I've been running a 2-hour virtual workshop called Understanding Bias. And I love this workshop because we talk about all the different ways bias impacts our decision making, from how we perceive different people to how we judge people to even who we decide to give attention to in conversations. It's kind of crazy just how much it's at play all the time. Then we talk about the most common types of bias in the workplace, because it's so difficult to call these things out in the heat of the moment if you don't actually know what they are or how to recognize them. So we go through all of that. Then we talk about how hard it is to engage with our identity and our privilege. And we do a bunch of incredible activities like an identity inventory, where we take an intersectional lens and think about everything from our race to our gender to our sexual orientation, but even our cultural preferences and our tastes and, the hobbies we had growing up, and think about how all these different experiences shaped us and also shape our judgments. And then we dive into anthropological theory and sociological theory about inequality and why it's so hard to achieve equality. Because I think it's important to remember that, if we want to go on this journey, we have to be willing to do the work. And I'm not saying it's hard, right? Because we did just send 2 guys to the International Space Station on a SpaceX rocket. And I don't want to be the generation that's written down in history as achieving commercial space travel before equality at work. No way. So I'm very proud of this workshop, and I think it's going to get us to where I want us to be on the equality front.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we wish you tons and tons of success.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and talking to us about it today. Folks, check out Abadesi's work and hustlecrew.com.
.co.
Hustlecrew.
Someone got the .com.
I've been there. That's hustlecrew.co is a great URL as well. We'll put it up on the screen and direct people over there. We'll go check it out, and good luck out there. Let's keep in touch. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Marshall.